On the day the will was read, everyone in the family received houses, land, or shares. My inheritance, however, was a single rusted key and a note. Old garage in the industrial district. My father and younger brother burst out laughing, mocking me. "He treated you like trash. That junk heap isn't worth a dime." I stood there, speechless, unsure how to respond. But days later, when I turned the key in the creaking iron door of the garage, the hinges screeching as my flashlight illuminated a hidden basement, my heart nearly stopped. Before me wasn't a pile of worthless scrap, but a truth powerful enough to change anyone's life. Hello, my name is Graham Kingsley. I'm 27, an ordinary insurance agent grappling daily with numbers, contracts, and sales quotas in a cramped office on the outskirts of Chicago. My life is unremarkable. No girlfriend, no house of my own, just a small apartment shared with 2 college friends and a bank account perpetually in the red. I once dreamed of achieving something grand, but with each passing day, that dream faded, buried under bills, calls from irritable clients, and the indifferent glances of coworkers. I'm just an average guy trying to find a place in this world, but it seems the world barely notices I exist. That summer, everything inside me shattered. My grandfather, the person I cherished most, passed away. He was William Kingsley, a tall man with a warm, resonant voice and eyes that sparkled with wisdom and kindness. To me, he wasn't just a grandfather, but a friend, a mentor, the only family member who saw potential in me, even when I saw none in myself. He used to tell me stories of his youth, of roaming America, working jobs from car mechanic to firefighter. He'd say, "Graham, life is an adventure. Don't fear failure, only fear not taking the first step." I'd listen, nod, but inwardly think, "Grandpa, how can I take a step when the world is crushing my shoulders?" The day he died, I felt like I'd lost an anchor, as if my small boat was swept into a vast ocean with no tether. He was the only one in the family who truly saw me, not as a failure or a mediocre insurance agent, but as someone with potential, with worth. His funeral took place on a sweltering summer morning, the sky gray as if pouring more sorrow onto us. The air was heavy, stifling, as if the world itself mourned him. The funeral home was packed. Neighbors, old friends, and unfamiliar faces I'd never met. They stood shoulder to shoulder, whispering heartfelt condolences. I heard their stories about him, some I only knew in part. An elderly woman with silver hair, her hands trembling as she clutched a handkerchief, shared how he fixed her plumbing for free for years, never accepting a cent. A middle-aged man, voice breaking, recounted how my grandfather lent him money to start a business, no contract, no interest, just a handshake and a simple, "I trust you." Each story was a piece of him, a man who lived for others with a heart impossibly vast. I was proud, truly proud, but that pride mingled with a sharp, cutting pain like a blade slicing into my heart. He had lived a meaningful life, radiant like the sun, but what about me? What had I done beyond burying myself in paperwork, struggling with insurance contracts, scrambling to meet quotas so my boss wouldn't berate me? I felt small, useless, a faint shadow beside his brilliance. Each time someone patted my shoulder saying they were sorry for my loss, I nodded, lips pressed tight to suppress the urge to scream. I wanted to shout that I hadn't just lost him. I'd lost the only person who believed I could achieve something great. Standing before his coffin, gazing at his serene face in eternal sleep, I felt my heart constrict. I wanted to talk to him again, to tell him I was still trying, even if I didn't know where I was going. I glanced at my mother standing a few steps away, her eyes red but offering a comforting smile. My father and younger brother, Elias, stood farther off, talking to relatives, their gazes cold as if I didn't exist. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, trying to hold back tears. I couldn't cry, not because I was strong, but because the pain was too vast, too deep to express. I stood there among the crowd, feeling lost in a world where my grandfather had been my guiding light, now extinguished. After the funeral, the family gathered at the lawyer's office, a small room smelling of old wood and paper. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table, his usual stern demeanor intact. He was a rigid man, valuing success and money above all else. To him, I was a disappointment, a son with lofty dreams who never amounted to anything. My brother Elias, 25, sat beside him, smug in his expensive suit. Elias was my father's pride, a graduate of a prestigious law school, working for a big firm, always making me feel small. Then Mr. Harper, the lawyer, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, began reading the will. The room fell silent, only the rustle of paper and my pounding heartbeat breaking the stillness. I didn't expect much. Everyone knew my grandfather was wealthy, but I never thought I'd get a large share. I just hoped for something small, perhaps a keepsake to hold his memory close. Mr. Harper read on, his voice like a slow, authoritative melody. My father inherited the large suburban house where my grandfather spent his final years. Elias received an investment portfolio worth millions, enough to advance his career. Aunts, uncles, cousins, each got their share. Land, stocks, even an old yacht my grandfather loved. Everyone nodded, satisfied, some smirking triumphantly. I sat there, feeling like an outsider, waiting for my turn with a flicker of hope. Finally, Mr. Harper looked at me, adjusting his glasses. "Graham Kingsley," he said, his voice lowering as if to emphasize. "William left you an old garage in the industrial district west of the city, along with a key." Silence. Then Elias's snicker broke through. "A garage?" he repeated, dripping with sarcasm. "Probably a pile of wartime scrap." My father didn't laugh, but his cold gaze said he'd expected nothing better for me. Others in the room exchanged looks, some hiding smiles. My face burned, blood rushing to my ears. A garage? A rusted key? Was that all my grandfather, whom I adored, who spent hours telling me stories, who urged me to believe in yourself, left me? This was his way of showing faith? I bowed my head, clutching the key Mr. Harper handed me. It was cold, heavy, flakes of rust sticking to my palm. I wanted to say something, to protest, to scream that my grandfather couldn't treat me this way. But I sat there, mute, letting the whispers and pitying glances pierce my already tattered pride. "Graham," my mother whispered, her hand squeezing mine, "don't be sad. Your grandfather never did anything without reason. He loved you and he knew you were special." Her voice was gentle, but I felt only bitterness. Special? How, when the family was laughing at me? Special when my inheritance was a dilapidated garage, likely full of dust and rats? I left the lawyer's office feeling as if the world had betrayed me. The key in my pocket was a constant reminder of my failure. I drove back to my apartment, mind blank. On the way, memories of my grandfather flooded back. His smile, the way he patted my shoulder when I felt inadequate. His words, "Life always finds a way, Graham. Just don't give up." But now, with him gone, I didn't know what to believe. He left me a garage, a joke, an insult, or a message I couldn't yet grasp. That night, I lay on the sofa in my dark apartment, staring at the rusted key on the table. It was nothing special, just an old piece of metal. But it stirred a storm in me. I thought of the funeral, his stories, my mother's trusting gaze. Did he truly have a purpose in leaving me this? Or had he simply forgotten me, as the family seemed to have long ago? I closed my eyes, trying to push away the disappointment gnawing at my heart. But deep down, a tiny spark of hope flickered. Maybe my mother was right. Maybe he had a reason. And maybe, just maybe, that old garage held a secret I never could have imagined. But in that moment, I didn't want to think further. The rusted key lay on the table like a bitter reminder of the will, the family's mocking laughter, and my worthlessness in their eyes. I shoved it into a drawer, locked it as if that could erase the humiliation crushing my chest. In the days that followed, I slipped back into my familiar routine, waking at 6, squeezing onto a stifling bus and stepping into the all-safe insurance office where I'd worked for 3 years. The office was a cold space with low partitions, incessant phone ringing, and the acrid smell of burnt coffee from an old machine. My job was selling insurance policies, policies I sometimes doubted were truly good for clients. The pressure to meet sales quotas weighed like a boulder, and my boss Gary never let me forget it. "Kingsley, you need to step up your numbers," he'd say, his voice icy, eyes sharp behind his glasses. "You know the consequences if you don't." My colleagues were no better. They were predators, ready to do anything to hit their targets, flattering clients, twisting truths. I didn't belong in their world. I tried to work honestly, explaining terms clearly to clients, but that only isolated me. "Idealistic fool," I overheard a colleague whisper behind my back. They mocked me, calling me the naive nice guy with sneering tones. I tried to ignore them, but each word was a knife slicing into my already fragile self-esteem. One Wednesday afternoon, as I reviewed a contract, I overheard a conversation between my colleague Jake and an elderly client, Mrs. Margaret. She was a widow, about 70, her voice trembling over the phone. Jake was pushing her to sign a life insurance policy with exorbitant fees, promising benefits I knew she'd never receive. I glanced over the partition, seeing Jake's smug smile, tapping his pen as if counting down to closing the deal. Something in me boiled. I thought of my grandfather, how he always said being decent was what mattered most. I thought of Mrs. Margaret, who'd likely saved her whole life only to be exploited by sweet lies. I stood, walked to Jake's desk, and kept my voice calm. "Mrs. Margaret, sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice slightly shaky. "I think you should review the contract's maintenance fees. They might be higher than you expect." Jake shot me a glare, but I pressed on. "If you'd like, I can send you a different policy better suited to your needs." Mrs. Margaret thanked me profusely, promising to reconsider. When the call ended, Jake slammed his pen down and stood. "Are you insane, Kingsley? That was a $100,000 deal." Before I could respond, Gary appeared, his face red with fury. "Kingsley, my office. Now." His small office felt like a cage, walls lined with certificates and awards. He didn't let me explain. "Who do you think you are? Some justice warrior? You just tanked a major deal and damaged the company's reputation?" I tried to say I was protecting the client, but he cut me off. "You're done, Kingsley. Pack your things and get out before the day's over." I froze, as if the floor had collapsed beneath me. Fired. 3 years hunched over a desk, enduring mockery, trying to prove my worth. All gone in a moment. I packed in silence, feeling the curious and gloating stares of my colleagues. Jake even smirked as I passed. I left with a cardboard box of personal items, the world turning its back on me. Back at my apartment, I sank onto the sofa, staring at the ceiling. My phone was silent. No texts, no calls. My once close friends had drifted away as I drowned in work and family pressures. My father, if he heard, would give me that familiar disappointed look. Elias would probably laugh, calling me the great failure. My mother would comfort me, but even her kindness couldn't ease the emptiness swallowing me. I'd lost everything. My job, my self-respect, and the last shred of hope that I could do something worthwhile. In my despair, I opened the drawer and pulled out the rusted key I'd tried to forget. It sat there, cold, a reminder of my grandfather, the will and the garage I'd dismissed as a cruel joke. But now, with nothing left to cling to, I felt a strange urge. Maybe that garage, however dilapidated and useless, was the only thing still mine. I gripped the key, rust scraping my skin, but I didn't care. "Nothing left to lose," I whispered to myself. I stood, pulled on my jacket, and decided to drive to the industrial district west of the city. I didn't know what I'd find in that garage. Maybe just dust and junk, or maybe an answer, a way out, something to keep me going. Whatever it was, I knew I had to go. The drive to the industrial district took nearly an hour, winding through potholed roads and past dilapidated, long-abandoned buildings. Chicago's West Side industrial area was once a bustling hub, but now it was a graveyard of rusted warehouses and faded billboards. I pulled up in front of a squat building, its concrete walls peeling and cloaked in dust and cobwebs. A heavy iron door loomed before me, marred by patches of rust, as if it hadn't been opened in decades. A tiny, nearly illegible sign worn by time bore the word Kingsley, my surname, my grandfather's. My heart skipped a beat. This was truly the place he left me. I stepped out of the car, the late afternoon chill making me shiver. The key in my hand felt heavier, as if carrying the weight of expectations I dared not consider. I stood before the door, hesitating. Part of me wanted to turn back, drive home, and resume my mundane life. But then I thought of my grandfather. His eyes when he told adventure stories, his unwavering belief that I could achieve something great. "Just try, Graham," I heard his voice in my head. "Just open that door." I inserted the key into the lock, feeling the rust grate against metal. I turned it hard, and the lock let out a dry, echoing clunk in the silent space. The iron door groaned, slowly swinging open, releasing a musty gust laced with the smell of old grease and metal. I switched on my phone's flashlight, its weak beam piercing the darkness inside. The space was barren, cold, with only a few rotting wooden crates and a pile of rusted tools scattered in a corner. I stepped in, dust swirling under my feet. "So this is it, Grandpa," I muttered, my voice tinged with bitterness. "An abandoned garage?" I walked around, the flashlight sweeping over stained walls and a cracked concrete floor. There was nothing of value, nothing but oppressive silence. But as I reached the far end of the garage, the light caught something that stopped me cold. A smaller metal door bolted to the wall, secured with an old combination lock. On it, a small brass plaque, its engraved handwriting faded by time, read, "Graham's birthday." My heart pounded. My birthday. I stood frozen, my trembling hand holding the phone. Had my grandfather left this sign deliberately? I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and entered the digits of my birth date. A soft click sounded, clear and deliberate. The lock released. I pushed the door, its hinges creaking, revealing a narrow staircase descending into deep darkness. I hesitated, feeling as if I were stepping into an adventure film I wasn't ready for. But curiosity, mixed with a touch of desperation, pulled me forward. I descended the steps, the flashlight's shaky beam illuminating damp concrete walls. The smell of earth and metal grew stronger. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, pitch-black basement, silent as a tomb. I raised the flashlight, and then I froze. Before me were stacks of gold bars gleaming under the faint light. They were neatly arranged on metal racks divided into 5 equal sections, each row shimmering with an almost hypnotic glow. My legs weakened, my breath caught in my chest. Gold. Hundreds of bars. I stumbled forward, touching one, feeling its cold, heavy weight in my palm. I'm rich," I whispered, my voice breaking. In that moment, I saw my life transform. Mansions, supercars, respect from the family who mocked me. I'd become a millionaire. No, a billionaire. Overnight. But then my eyes were drawn to a small iron table in the center of the basement. On it sat an old envelope sealed with red wax, bearing shaky handwritten words. "Task for Graham." My heart raced again, not with excitement, but with a premonition that this wasn't as simple as it seemed. I tore open the envelope, my hands trembling so much I nearly dropped it. Inside was a folded sheet, my grandfather's clear but frail handwriting staring back at me. "Dear Graham," the letter began. "If you're reading this, you found the vault. But what you see isn't a reward to keep for yourself. It's a challenge. This gold belongs to those who need it more than you. You must deliver it to the 5 addresses listed on the racks. All the information you need is there. I'm sorry for placing this burden on you, but I believe you're the only one who can fulfill it. Be strong, Graham. I've always believed in you." I let the letter fall, my mind reeling. Not a reward, not wealth, a challenge, a task. I looked at the gleaming gold, feeling as if it mocked me. My grandfather had left me a treasure, but it wasn't mine. I wanted to scream, to ask why he'd done this to me. But then his image flashed in my mind. His kind smile, his trusting eyes. "I believe in you," he wrote. And in that moment, in the cold basement, a small flame sparked within me. But that flame was fragile, easily overshadowed by the dazzling glow of the gold before me. I slumped onto the cold concrete floor, my eyes fixed on the stacks of gleaming gold. In the dim basement, they shone like tiny stars, radiant and beckoning. I calculated, though I was no math whiz. Each bar must weigh a few pounds, and there were hundreds here. Worth hundreds of millions? That kind of money could change everything. I could buy a hilltop mansion, a sleek supercar, pay off debts, and live a life I'd never dared dream of. I pictured my father with his perpetually cold gaze forced to look at me with respect. Elias, my arrogant younger brother, silenced as I walked into a room in an expensive suit. And my old colleagues at All Safe who mocked me. They'd choke on their envy seeing my success. But if I followed my grandfather's wishes, if I delivered this gold to those 5 unknown addresses, I'd be left with nothing. Not a penny, not a chance to change my life. I'd return to being Graham Kingsley, the unemployed loser scorned by family with only a rented apartment and a foggy future. The thought tightened my chest, as if an invisible hand were squeezing my heart. I reached out, trembling, and touched a gold bar. It was cold, heavy, impossibly real. I lifted it, letting the flashlight's beam catch its surface, making it shimmer like a promise. Just 1 bar, I whispered to myself. Who would know? I could sell it quietly, find a black market dealer, trade it for a few million. No one would find out. My grandfather was gone, and this vault was my secret. I imagined holding cash, the freedom of no longer worrying about bills or contemptuous glances. Temptation swelled like a tidal wave, drowning the last of my reason. But then, like a lightning bolt through my mind, my grandfather's voice rang clear as if he stood beside me. Wealth isn't what you keep for yourself, but what you're willing to give away. I remembered a summer afternoon years ago when I was a 12-year-old boy sitting with him on a bench in the yard. He held my hand, his eyes deep, and spoke those words with a sincerity I never forgot. Back then, I didn't fully grasp their meaning, but now in this vault they cut through the haze of temptation like a blade. I set the bar down, my hands still shaking. My mother's image flashed in my mind. Gentle, steadfast. Your grandfather had his reasons, she'd said after the will reading when the family laughed at me. She always believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. And my grandfather, he chose me, not my father, not Elias, but me, for this task. He believed I could do it. But do what? Give away a fortune while I had nothing? I sat there for hours, my mind torn between 2 paths. One offered wealth, power, and the recognition I'd craved. The other was a promise to my grandfather, an intangible legacy I didn't fully understand. The vault was silent save for my breathing and the pounding of my heart. I looked at the gold, then at the letter, his shaky handwriting staring back, demanding an answer. Night fell, the air in the vault growing colder. I hugged my knees, searching for a reason to keep the gold. But each time I reached for a bar, my grandfather's image appeared, his eyes piercing my soul. I believe in you. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, Grandpa, I don't know if I'm strong enough. As the first light of dawn seeped through the vault's door, I stood. My legs were heavy, but my mind for a moment was clearer. I would follow his wishes. I couldn't betray him. I couldn't betray my mother's faith. And perhaps most importantly, I couldn't betray myself. The part of me that still believed I could do what was right no matter how hard. I approached the first stack of gold, read the recipient's address, and began dragging it. It was heavier than I expected, but I didn't let myself falter. I hauled it up the stairs step by step, sweat streaming down my forehead. When I loaded it into the truck's trunk, I glanced back at the vault one last time, the gold still shimmering, whispering its allure. But I'd made my choice. Grandpa, I said softly, my voice breaking in the cold morning air, I'll trust you one more time. I hope I'm not wrong. I closed the vault, locked it tight, and climbed into the truck. The engine roared, shattering the silence of the industrial district. Ahead lay a journey I didn't know the end of, but in my heart I felt a strange relief. I didn't know what I'd face: danger, failure, or something greater. The first address in my grandfather's letter led me to a remote mountainous region in northern America, a place even my phone's GPS struggled to locate. A small town nestled deep in New York's Adirondack Mountains, where winter arrived early and the cold cut through skin and bone. The journey took 3 days, winding through twisting roads, snow-draped pine forests, and tiny towns speckled with faint lights. I drove alone, the radio occasionally crackling with snippets of country songs before fading out. The farther I went, the more I felt the weight of this task, both literally and figuratively. Each time I stopped for gas or rested at a roadside diner, I couldn't help glancing at the trunk, my heart lurching at the thought. I'm carrying a fortune. What if I just ran? The temptation slithered back, like a venomous snake whispering in my ear. I could veer onto a different road, find a gold dealer, and live a life I'd never dared dream of. No one would know. But then another fear crept in. What if someone discovered I was transporting gold? An old truck, a jobless guy wandering the roads. I was the perfect target for robbers, or worse, the police. I imagined being pulled over, searched, questioned. Where did you get this gold? How could I explain? Every odd sound on the road, a car horn behind me, the wind whistling through the window, made me jump, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I began to wonder if I had the strength to complete this task, or if my grandfather had misplaced his faith in me. After 3 exhausting days, I reached the address in the letter, a small wooden cabin tucked in a valley surrounded by towering pines. The house looked humble, its moss-covered roof and smoke curling from the chimney the only signs of life. I parked, took a deep breath, and knocked. Slow footsteps sounded from within and the door opened. An elderly man, thin and white-haired with clouded but sharp eyes, stood before me. He wore a worn sweater, leaning on a cane, yet his posture radiated the resilience of someone who'd endured hard years. "I'm Graham Kingsley," I said, my voice trembling, unsure if from the cold or the nervous tension gripping my chest. "William Kingsley's grandson. I brought this for you." I gestured to the wooden crate at my feet, not daring to say gold, as if the word alone could make me a target. Henry, his name was on the envelope, glanced at the crate, then locked eyes with me. There was no surprise, only a deep sadness, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for years. "William's gone, isn't he?" he asked, his voice low and sorrowful, each word reopening the wound of my grandfather's loss. I nodded, a lump rising in my throat as I thought of him. Henry's eyes glistened, but he didn't let tears fall. He gave a small nod as if long prepared and motioned me to bring the crate inside. "Come in, young man. It's cold out." I dragged the crate into the small wooden cabin, the smell of burning wood and old timber filling the air. The interior was startlingly simple, a chipped wooden table, a crackling fireplace, and a few faded photos on the walls blurred by time. I set the crate on the floor and opened it, the gold's gleam reflecting on Henry's face. But instead of awe, he ran his hand over the bars slowly, as if touching a memory more precious than metal. "William always kept his word," he said, his voice trembling, his eyes lost in a distant past. "He invited me to sit by the fire, pouring hot tea from an old kettle. The warmth seeped into my hands, but it couldn't dispel the chill in my heart. Henry seemed to sense my silence. He sat across from me, his frail hands gripping his cane, and began to speak. "You know, during the worst of World War II, in a freezing night in the Ardennes, William saved our entire platoon," he said slowly, as if reliving each moment. "Bullets were flying. None of us thought we'd survive. But William risked his life to lead us out of an ambush. He was wounded, blood pouring, but never complained. After, he just said, 'Surviving is enough.' He never spoke of it again, never wanted to be called a hero." He paused, his eyes misty. "But to me, to all of us, William was the greatest hero." I sat there, silent, feeling as if my heart had been cracked open. I knew my grandfather was good, but hearing this from Henry, I saw a different William Kingsley. A man not just kind, but courageous, selfless, and humble in a way that made me both proud and heartbroken. I wondered why he never told me these stories, why he only shared light tales on the porch. Did he want me to discover them myself? like he led me to this vault. Henry took my hand, his trembling grip warm as if passing me strength from the past. "Thank you, Graham," he said, his voice choked. "And thank William. He chose the right person. You're like him, not in your face, but in your eyes. The eyes of someone who'll do what's right, no matter how hard." His words were a blade, both painful and comforting. I wanted to say something, to thank him, but my throat was tight. I only nodded, eyes stinging, holding back tears. I drove away from the cabin, a mix of emotions swirling within. A portion of the gold was gone from my hands, but in its place, I carried a pride and emotion I couldn't describe. My grandfather didn't just leave gold. He left stories, living legacies in the hearts of those he touched. I looked at the road ahead, long and cold, but for the first time I didn't feel alone. The second address in my grandfather's letter took me to a bustling port city in the east, Boston, where massive ships docked and the air was thick with the briny scent of the sea. I decided not to drive this time, partly because the distance was too great, partly because the fear of being followed haunted me. An old truck hauling gold across highways wasn't a smart idea. Instead, I chose the train, hoping the crowded station would let me blend in. I wrapped the gold crate in tight packaging, disguising it as ordinary cargo, but each time I lifted it, I felt its weight. Not just the gold, but the responsibility my grandfather had placed on my shoulders. Boston's South Station was packed, the loudspeaker announcements mingling with the murmurs of passengers. I pulled the crate on a cart, my heart pounding whenever someone brushed past or stared too long. Sweat rolled down my forehead despite the chilly station air. I imagined a thief spotting what I carried, or worse, a security guard demanding to inspect the crate. "What's in here?" How could I answer? Every train whistle, every unfamiliar glance made me flinch. Temptation crept back, whispering, "Give up, Graham. Find a dark corner, hide the gold, and disappear. No one will know." But each time the thought surfaced, I recalled Henry, his eyes as he spoke of my grandfather's heroism. I clenched my fists, telling myself to keep going. The train to Boston took over 10 hours, and I barely slept. I sat hunched in a corner of the carriage, eyes fixed on the crate at my feet. Each time the train stopped, I checked the lock. When we finally reached Boston, I was near exhaustion, but adrenaline kept me moving. The address led to a gleaming high-rise in the city center where men in expensive suits moved like shadows in a world I didn't belong to. The recipient was Charles Donovan, a wealthy businessman and former partner of my grandfather. I was ushered into his office, a spacious room with glass walls overlooking Boston Harbor, its opulent furnishings making me self-conscious in my worn jacket. Donovan, a man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and sharp but not unkind eyes, stood to greet me. "William Kingsley's grandson. I've heard about you," he said, his voice warm as if he'd been expecting me for years. I set the wooden crate on the floor, my hands trembling as I opened it. But instead of shock at the sight of the gold, Donovan gave a sad smile, tinged with memory and regret. "That's William's style," he murmured almost to himself, his voice trailing off. He invited me to sit on a plush leather chair, offering a glass of whiskey from an ornate crystal decanter, which I declined with an awkward shake of my head. "William started from nothing, you know," he began, his voice slow, like opening a dusty old book. "Just a car mechanic with big dreams. But he became a millionaire with an impressive fortune. I always admired his relentless spirit." I listened, feeling as if I were seeing another version of my grandfather, a man who dared to trust others even when the world turned its back. Donovan continued, his eyes gleaming with respect and sorrow. "Years ago, William owed me a debt. After a few years, he repaid me many times over, not just with money, but with respect, with friendship. He never boasted, never wanted anyone to know. And now, this gold..." He paused, looking at the crate, his gaze touching a promise from the past. "This isn't just gold. It's how he kept his word. To me, to all of us." Donovan pulled a small folded paper from his desk drawer and handed it to me. "This is for you," he said, his voice low but firm. "William told me to keep it until you came." I unfolded it, revealing a string of numbers in my grandfather's handwriting. The second piece. Keep your integrity, Graham. Gold is secondary. I stared at Donovan, stunned, feeling as if I'd received an intangible but weighty gift. Integrity is a man's greatest asset, he said, his eyes serious yet warm. William taught me that, and now he wants to teach you. As I left the office, night had fallen, the city lights reflecting on the harbor waters. I no longer carried the crate, but my heart was heavy with mixed emotions. Awe for my grandfather, regret for not understanding him sooner, and fear of the journey still ahead. Donovan stood at the door, looking at me as if he saw my grandfather in me. "You'll do fine, Graham," he said, his voice certain. His words were a spark of warmth in the cold Boston night, but also a new burden pushing me to continue despite the murky road ahead. When I returned, my mind was still reeling from Mr. Donovan's story, the mysterious piece of the puzzle and the message about integrity. But as I reopened my grandfather's letter, the next address made my heart skip a beat. A small town in the south, Savannah, Georgia. A place I'd never been, yet its name stirred a strange feeling in me, as if it held a deeper secret. After 2 days of driving through endless highways and sprawling cotton fields under a blazing sun, Savannah appeared before me on a radiant golden afternoon. Its cobblestone streets, ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss, and air laced with the scent of the sea mixed with old memories greeted me. The address in the letter led to a small house at the end of a quiet street, its white paint faded, its tiled roof yellowed by time. The house felt like a relic from the past, with a small porch and wilted flower pots. I took a deep breath, pulled the gold crate from the trunk, and knocked. The sound echoed dryly as if rousing a dormant memory. The door opened, revealing an elderly woman in her 80s, frail and slightly hunched, but with bright eyes that held an entire story. She wore a simple floral dress, her silver hair neatly tied back. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice gentle but wary. "I'm Graham Kingsley," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "William Kingsley's grandson. I brought this for you." I gestured to the wooden crate, my heart pounding as her eyes flicked to it. Suddenly she froze, a thin hand covering her mouth, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "William," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're William's grandson?" I nodded, unsure what to say. She invited me inside, and the small room was filled with the scent of lavender and old wood. I set the crate on the floor and opened it. She glanced at the gold but didn't touch it, her trembling hand brushing the crate's lid as if it were a sacred relic. "He never forgot," she said, her voice choked. "All these years, William kept his promise." Her name was Clara, and she began to speak, her voice slow but brimming with emotion. She was my grandfather's first love from their youthful days in Savannah when they dreamed of a shared future. They loved each other deeply, but war, family, and harsh responsibilities tore them apart. My grandfather chose to leave, enlisted, and later built a new life. But he never forgot Clara. Over the years, he quietly sent gifts, money, and brief letters of encouragement, never revealing himself fully. "He was always haunted," Clara said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Haunted by not giving me the life we planned. But he made up for it with all his heart for years." I sat there silent, feeling as if I were seeing a part of my grandfather's heart I'd never known. He wasn't just a hero or a businessman, but a man who carried love and pain. Clara looked at me, her gaze distant yet warm. "You're like him in your sincerity. Hold on to that, don't let it slip." As I left the house, the sun had set, leaving Savannah's sky tinged purple. My heart was heavy with mixed emotions. Astonishment at my grandfather's love story, sorrow for what he and Clara lost, and admiration for the loyalty he maintained all his life. He wasn't just a model of integrity, but a flesh and blood man with scars and deep love. I climbed into the truck, clutching the folded paper in my pocket. Another piece of the legacy my grandfather left behind, and another step toward understanding myself. But as I reopened his letter, the next address stopped me cold. A nursing home in the West, far off in Tucson, Arizona. a distant, arid place where people lived out their final days in quiet, and I wondered what my grandfather had left there. The journey to Tucson was another test. I drove through endless highways, past golden deserts and barren mountains under scorching sun. The crate of gold in the trunk remained a burden, not just in weight, but in the relentless thoughts tearing at me. Each stop at a desert gas station made me feel the prying eyes of strangers, as if they knew I carried something precious. The fear of being robbed or discovered clung to me, but now it was overshadowed by something else. A growing sense of duty, as if each trip affirmed I couldn't let my grandfather down. Tucson emerged on a sweltering afternoon, its streets dusted red and lined with silent cacti. The nursing home sat on the outskirts, a low building with faded brick walls and a small garden of wildflowers. I pulled the gold crate from the trunk, sweat soaking my shirt, my heart pounding at the thought of explaining this bizarre visit. The wooden crate was heavy, each step dragging the weight of this journey. I pushed open the main door, a small bell jingling. After explaining myself to a nurse at the reception, I was led down a short hallway where the scent of antiseptic mingled with jasmine from the garden. The office of Susan, the director, was a cozy room with a wooden desk cluttered with papers and a family photo on the wall. Susan stood to greet me, a middle-aged woman with short, silver-streaked hair and a kind smile, though her eyes held curiosity. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice gentle but cautious. I dragged the crate into the room, the wood scraping the floor, making us both pause. "I'm Graham Kingsley," I said, my voice shaky, unsure if from the crate's weight or the moment's pressure. "William Kingsley's grandson. I brought this as part of his wishes." Her eyes widened as she saw the gold bars. Her trembling hand covered her mouth, a mix of shock and emotion flashing across her face. "William," she whispered, her voice choked, as if the name unlocked a deep memory. "He supported this home for years. I never expected this." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she smiled, a smile both sorrowful and grateful. I stood there, my heart tightening, feeling as if I'd touched another part of my grandfather. Not just my kin, but a benefactor to strangers. I wanted to say something, but my throat was dry and I could only watch Susan trying to grasp the meaning of this moment. She led me to the common room where elderly residents sat in worn armchairs, some gazing out windows, others quietly playing chess. When she mentioned my grandfather's name, the room seemed to still. A white-haired man with clouded eyes grasped my hand, his voice trembling. "William Kingsley?" He gave us good meals, warm blankets. An elderly woman by the window smiled, her gaze distant. "He never visited, but we always prayed for him." Tears stung my eyes, not just from their words, but from the realization that my grandfather had quietly touched so many lives, even unknown to our family. Susan looked at me, her eyes gentle but filled with respect. "You've brought a great gift, Graham," she said warmly. "Not just gold, but your grandfather's legacy." She invited me to stay for dinner, a simple meal of mashed potatoes and stew, but filled with laughter and stories. I sat beside an old man named George, a former carpenter. He looked at me, his eyes bright. "You're lucky carrying the blood of a man like that." William was one of a kind. As I left the nursing home, night had fallen over Tucson, streetlights twinkling like small stars. I sat in the truck alone, watching the lights pass by the window. My heart was both heavy and alight. My grandfather was greater than I'd ever imagined, not just for what he did for family, but for his silent contributions to strangers. I started the engine, knowing this journey was changing me bit by bit in ways I never expected. As I opened my grandfather's letter, the final address stopped me in my tracks. A building in downtown Chicago, the headquarters of the Horizon Charity Foundation, a nationally renowned organization. I'd heard of it. Who hasn't? But the thought that my grandfather was connected to such a place made my heart race, as if I were about to touch the last piece of a puzzle I'd only glimpsed in fragments. I had delivered 4 portions of gold, each time letting go of a piece of my dream of wealth, but also uncovering more about my grandfather. The hero, the friend, the steadfast lover. Now, with only one crate of gold left, I felt a strange emptiness. I no longer feared being robbed or discovered, but a question lingered. After giving everything away, what would I have left? I drove through Chicago's familiar streets, the city's lights bright but cold, as if reminding me I was nearing the end of a journey I wasn't ready to release. The Horizon Foundation's building loomed in the city center, a modern structure of glass and steel, starkly different from the places I'd visited before. I dragged the gold crate through the main entrance, feeling out of place in my worn jacket and dust-caked shoes. The receptionist, a young woman with a professional smile, eyed me skeptically. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but clearly assuming I was in the wrong place. "I'm Graham Kingsley," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here to see the Foundation's director. I brought this, per my grandfather William Kingsley's wishes." I set the wooden crate down and pulled out the letter with his handwriting. Her eyes widened as she scanned the document, and within a minute, she led me through a gleaming hallway to the director's office. Mr. Carter, a middle-aged man with silver-streaked hair and sharp but warm eyes, stood to greet me. When I mentioned my grandfather's name, his face froze as if the name had stirred a profound memory. "William Kingsley?" he repeated, his voice catching, his eyes betraying unguarded emotion. He was one of this foundation's most discreet founders. For years he contributed without ever wanting his name known. My heart tightened. I placed the crate on the floor and opened it, the gold's gleam reflecting on Carter's face. But instead of awe, he gently touched a bar, his hand trembling, his gaze lost in a distant memory. "William," he whispered, his voice filled with respect and sorrow. "He always did everything for others, never for himself." I stood there, my chest constricting under a flood of emotions. I thought I'd come to know my grandfather through the previous stops. But in this moment, seeing Carter's eyes, I realized he was even greater than I'd imagined. Carter led me to a bookshelf, pulling out a thick folder and several old framed photos. "You need to see what your grandfather did," he said, his voice low but charged with emotion. Before me were images and documents. A children's hospital built in a rural area with kids smiling brightly by their beds. Impoverished students receiving scholarships, their eyes sparkling with hope. Disaster relief camps providing food and shelter to thousands. All bore my grandfather's mark. Massive donations, decades-long projects. Yet not once did he let his name appear. "He wanted it all done for people, not for fame," Carter said, tears glinting in his eyes. Then he looked at me, his gaze gentle but brimming with respect. "You've brought the final piece, Graham," he said warmly. "Not just gold, but William's legacy. You're the one he chose, and I see why." Tears stung my eyes, not for the gold, but for the truth that my grandfather had quietly built a legacy saving thousands, unknown even to our family, to me. I handed the crate to Carter, my hands shaking, not from the gold's weight, but from the emptiness swallowing me. I'd given away all the gold, my dream of wealth gone, but in its place I gained a staggering truth. My grandfather was greater than any fortune I'd imagined. As I left the building, Chicago's sky was dark, a light rain falling on my jacket. I stood under a street lamp, feeling as if I'd lost everything yet found something far greater. I climbed into the truck, rain seeping through my jacket, chilling me, but the emptiness in my heart was vaster than the cold of the Chicago night. I had followed my grandfather's wishes, delivered all the gold, but now I didn't know what I had left beyond memories and fragmented pieces of a great man I was only beginning to understand. I drove toward the industrial district in the west, where my grandfather's old garage stood silently, a witness to my journey. The familiar road felt different now, as if every street corner, every light, looked at me with new eyes. When I stopped before the rusted iron door, the rain had grown heavier, tapping steadily on the truck's roof. I stepped inside, leaving the lights off, letting the darkness and the smell of old grease envelop me. I went straight to the basement where the treasure had once stunned me. Now the metal rack stood empty, cold, echoing only my footsteps. I sat on the floor, leaning against a rack, staring into the void. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice breaking in the dark, "I did it. I gave it all away, but now I'm left with nothing." I don't know how long I sat there, perhaps hours, letting thoughts flow like water. I thought of Henry, Donovan, Clara, the elderly in the nursing home, and the Horizon Foundation. They all carried a piece of my grandfather. His kindness, his sacrifice, his vast heart greater than any vault of gold. But what about me? I'd done the right thing, but why did this emptiness feel so immense? I hugged my knees, feeling like a lost child, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure would come. Then a sound broke my thoughts, the dry creak of the iron door upstairs. My heart raced, my hand gripping my phone like a reflex. Was someone here? I sprang up, the flashlight's trembling beam illuminating the staircase. A tall, lean figure appeared, their steps slow but steady. "Graham Kingsley?" A deep voice called, not threatening but enough to put me on edge. The man descended into the basement, the light revealing his face. A man about 60 with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a neat black suit, his eyes sharp but not cold. "I'm Arthur Hayes," he said. "William Kingsley's private lawyer." I stood frozen, my mind reeling. Private lawyer? My grandfather never mentioned this man. And how did he know I was here at this exact moment? I opened my mouth, voice trembling. How did you know I was here?" Arthur gave a faint smile, both mysterious and reassuring. "William knew you'd come back," he said, his voice low as if reciting a scripted story. "He instructed me to monitor your journey from afar to ensure you completed the task. This basement has a discreet alarm system triggered when you first opened the door. It signaled me, and I knew you'd return after delivering all the gold. William planned everything. He knew you wouldn't give up." My head spun, a mix of shock and confusion. An alarm system? My grandfather had orchestrated it all, from the gold to this moment. Arthur set a leather briefcase on the iron table in the basement, opening it to reveal a thick envelope sealed with red wax, identical to the one I'd found before. "You should read this," he said, his voice calm but commanding. My hands shook as I took the envelope, my grandfather's familiar handwriting staring back. "To Graham, when the journey is complete." I tore it open, my heart pounding. Inside was a letter and a stack of legal documents. I read, each line piercing my heart. "Dear Graham, if you're reading this, you've completed the task I gave you. The gold in the vault wasn't a reward but a test. I wanted to know if you had enough honesty, faith, and compassion to do what's right, even when it's hard. You did, and I couldn't be prouder. What I wanted to pass on wasn't gold, but the values I lived by: honesty, trust, and love for others. But I haven't left you empty-handed. Years ago, I set up a legal trust worth $10 million, including real estate, shares, and bank accounts. It's yours, Graham, because you've proven yourself worthy." I let the letter fall, tears streaming uncontrollably. I was stunned, unable to believe what I'd read. $10 million? I looked at Arthur, my voice choked. Is this real?" He nodded, his eyes gentle. "The trust was established long ago, waiting for you to finish the journey. William knew you'd do it. He always believed in you." I sank to the floor, feeling as if the world had turned upside down. The long days of feeling I'd lost everything, the sleepless nights fearing robbery, the moments torn between temptation and duty, all led to this. I hadn't just inherited wealth, but my grandfather's immense legacy, alive in the hearts of those he helped, from Henry, Donovan, Clara, to the thousands saved through the foundation. I looked at the empty basement, now just a void, but my heart was full. My grandfather didn't just leave gold or money, but a lesson: to live for kindness, justice, and humanity. I stepped out of the garage. The rain had stopped and moonlight lit the road ahead. I drove through new streets, my gaze resolute. I wasn't just a young millionaire. I was Graham Kingsley, bearer of my grandfather's legacy, and I would live worthy of his trust.